Now, indeed, there are subgroups as well. Now, they're not shown on here, but each one of these has 7 ashrams in it. So you have 7 big ashrams and 7 sub-ashrams under each. So sometimes when you read the Tibetan, he'll talk about the 49 ashrams. Well, now you know. Now you know what that means, the 49 ashrams. Okay? Now we're told that not all of those 49 have coalesced and are in full formation. Some have and some, I think all of them in the first ray ashram and certainly the second ray ashram, probably the fifth ray ashram too, they probably have all of their sub-ashrams fully coordinated and active. I'm not sure. I know the second ray ashram for sure has all 7 sub-ashrams fully formed. But the point is that a sub-ashram is sort of like a sub-agenda to the big ashram's efforts. So for instance, as an example, let's look at the second ray ashram. The second ray ashram in the widest sense is responsible for 2 big things. Anybody know what they are?
Love.
Right. But 2 things in terms of social tendencies. It's the ray of education. So it governs all educational initiatives around the world. All of them. Whether it's a primitive culture or an advanced culture, the urge to learn, the urge to teach, all of that is an outpicturing of this great ray trying to work through that collective consciousness called culture. Okay? Second ray souls are therefore more likely to gravitate to teaching areas or the healing arts. It rules the healing arts, so all medicine, all alternative healing, and many of the fundamental helping professions in the world. Okay? So, but that's its piece. Its piece is not to be a shaper of public policy through politics. Its piece is not to engage in finding solutions that have to do with economic crisis. Its piece is to enliven and enrich the urge to learn in the society. So whatever ray you're on as a member of the new group of world servers, whatever ray you're on, it's defining the stream of your specialization. And then the sub-ray you're on is defining the sub-manifestation of that. So for instance, let us say that, I'm going to make this up, but let's say that you had a second ray soul, a second ray disciple. So, and let's say this is a teaching disciple, so there's a teaching quality, educational quality here. And let's say that the sub-ray for that individual is third ray. So 2 sub-3. Now 2 sub-3 can manifest in a couple ways. But 3 is the ray most associated with the business world today. In fact, this ashram here, the third ray, its primary objective is economics and business. That's what it's working on. But if I'm out of the 2 and I have a sub-3, it could mean that I'm going to be inclined, my piece of the plan is to be a teaching force, but within the context of business and economics. The business trainer out there, for instance, okay? Or the teacher of economics at a university. You see? That's just one example. Okay? If on the other hand I am 2 sub-4, 4 is often the arts or psychology. So if it's the arts, it's maybe I'm teaching, but I want to teach by using a lot of visual artistic images as a function of teaching, because that's how I feel called to do it. Okay? If I'm 5, sub-5, 5 is the ray of the scientist and analytical thinking. Well, you can kind of get a sense of it. Loving wisdom, expressed in education, applied within a more scientific environment. would be the inclination of the life. Doesn't mean they will for sure do that, but depending upon how soul aligned they are, depending upon how they've made decisions in their life that allow them to navigate, because sometimes we often bind our lives in such a way that later on we realize that we have this deeper call, but our circumstances of life have now prevented us from taking that direction. You know about that. We imprison our lives by the bindings are often self-imposed by decisions made earlier. Okay? And then we have to figure out a way of freeing ourselves. Okay, but so each of those are like slices within slices within slices of what the plan is. No ashram, none of the big ashrams, none of the 7 ashrams know the whole plan. No master. Each one of these has a big master, a 6th degree initiate. Like the Master Jesus. The Master Jesus is over this ashram right here. 6th degree initiate, Master Jesus. Master Jesus doesn't know the whole plan. The Master Jesus has a huge responsibility for the 6th ray and probably has some loose connection with the others, but the whole plan is not in his view either. In a way, the only being that has the whole plan under the eye is the Christ himself. And beyond that, Sanat Kumara, who's said to be the consciousness of the planetary logos, of course, would have that sense of it. So it's important to see it not as a fullness, but as a sliver. And not only do we only see it as a sliver, but not only do we only see a sliver, but we only see a fragment of that sliver as it's trying to unfold over the course of time. So don't see the plan as being an end point, see it as a process. So right now we're entering the 21st century. There's a whole urge of education along the 2nd ray line. So we are seeing only aspects of the evolution of education that are pertaining to where we're at right now. We don't have a sense of how that plan is going to look in that ashram in 100 years. We don't have that yet. We're not there yet. So we only see it, a sliver of it. So there's a couple kinds of slivers here. You see what I'm saying? Nonetheless, we see what we need to see. We're given what we need to know. But can we hear it? Can we rightly frame thoughts around it? Because these are intuitions, remember. These are deep, subtle intuitions. The look on your faces. If only I could have the camera facing toward you. I could use this as a great teaching tool. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, each ashram has its own piece of work to do in the world. Okay? And these ashrams are not in equal proportion in the world. That's also really important to realize. That there are certain ashrams where disciples are more prevalent today from certain ashrams and prevalent in other ashrams. So the strongest ashrams today are this one, the 1st ray ashram, the 2nd ray ashram, and the 5th ray ashram. Those are the strongest present ashrams. The 3rd ray ashram is actually pretty steadily present as well, and it's growing, I believe, because so much of the world crisis that we're facing is having to be dealt with from that ashram, because that's the ashram of economic affairs, and its commitment is to work on developing systems that support right distribution of resources. 4th ray isn't even here. 4th ray ashram isn't even in manifestation right now. 6th ray ashram is withdrawing. 7th ray ashram is growing, coming in more into force, because it's a 7th ray age that we're going into. So that's an important concept as you think about this whole work, all of this work. These are big departments. These are big, huge inner departments of categories of consciousness. But they have a rhythmic nature in their unfolding over the course of centuries, and it's a weaving, and it's a tapestry, and that each ray, its cycle of incarnation, abstraction, its length of cycle varies. Certain ashrams, like the second ray ashram, has a very, very long cycle. The fourth ray ashram, which right now isn't in incarnation, it has a very short cycle comparatively. So it's a weaving, okay? And there are people that actually try to study human history with an understanding of those cycles and ray patterns to try to understand our journey in light of the rays. Okay? The rays that will be most important as we enter into the age of Aquarius in the fullest sense will be ray 2, ray 5, and ray 7. Anybody know why? What is the relationship between rays 2, 5, and 7 as it pertains to the sign of Aquarius? Pardon me? Mind. Well, actually, mind is very much part of it. That's correct, particularly the fifth ray quality. Well, see, actually, it wasn't a fair question. Sorry, it's not a fair question. Science. That's right. So the fifth ray, see, Aquarius is a sign of the zodiac that brings forth the fifth ray. That's its main background quality, fifth ray. That's the ray of mind, and it's the cause of the emergence of science as a growing phenomena in human consciousness. And the fifth ray ashram, which is a group of actual fifth ray souls, they have an easy opportunity here to come forward because they have an astrological sign that's consistent with their nature that helps in the process. Okay? The seventh ray, why that's important, that's a grounding ray. The seventh ray is the ray of grounding truth. It's the ray of the practical mystic. And the planet that rules Aquarius is the planet Uranus. Now Uranus is an entity. Planets are entities. They are ray entities. They have a soul and a personality. Uranus is a seventh ray soul. So the ruling planet, which is the representing planet for the sign of Aquarius, is a seventh ray entity. The other ray is the second ray, because in esoteric astrology there's actually a traditional ruling planet, in this case Uranus, but there's also an esoteric ruling planet, which is the sole ruler of the sign, and that's Jupiter. And Jupiter is a second ray planet. So fifth ray is the ray that governs the sign of Aquarius. Seventh ray is the ray that governs the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And the second ray is the ray that governs the sole ruler of Aquarius. Those are going to be very strong rays that will be playing out over the next 2,160 years, give or take a few. Yeah.
Can we take it that the will is constant? The clan can be fluid and they have to be changed because of maybe the dominance of the lower personality or a change?
Yeah.
And it won't work, and suddenly something dominates the planet, or there's a change because of the amount of free will in the lower personality, that the clan can, that the Christ may decide, I can't do it.
Well, that's the great question. So his question, I think, is because humanity has free will, can that determine the pace of the plan and its manifestation, and could it be thwarted to such an extent by our own free will that what is intended doesn't come to pass, or the Christ doesn't come forward, that sort of thing? Is that what you're saying?
He doesn't come when you think, or when it's supposed to come in the plan, like, you know?
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen. Of course, there's eons of time for it to happen, so maybe it's going to happen in another 1,000 years or whatever.
Well, that's right. I mean, in the big picture, over the vastness of time, the plan will unfold. And it's just a matter of the question of time. And so the hierarchy knows the plan. The hierarchy is trying to bring it forth, but they don't have the capacity to know for sure how humanity will respond and at what pace they will respond. And apparently, according to the Tibetan, the jury's out on how well we're doing with it. In some cases, we're actually going slower than we should. Other cases, we've actually proven to be faster than anticipated. You know, it is said, for instance, that humanity discovered the energy of nuclear energy 1,000 years ahead of schedule. But I think that humanity has demonstrated a tendency, an excessive tendency towards separative tendencies that is lagging too slow. So the jury's out. The jury's out. According to Helena Blavatsky, the great mystic who was the founder of this, she said this. She said, occultism must win the day by the end of the 21st century. The Tibetan says something similar. How does he put that? He says that he wrote this back in about, I don't know, maybe the 1940s or something, but something to the effect that the whole thing must turn, that humanity must turn and truly come into its oneness within the next 150 years. But he wrote that about 70 years ago, something like that. So we're kind of, this is a critical time. Will we rise to the occasion or not? In the big picture, over the vastness of time, yeah, it's all going to work to the benefit, because look, what's really evolving here, friends? What's really evolving? It's the planetary logos that's evolving. It's this massive entity that is informing this planet. It's alive, it's a being. And you and I are just layers of its consciousness as it struggles to evolve. And this layer just happens to be internally conflicted with itself. This human layer, because it's dualistic, it's conflicted with itself and it has a mind of its own. But the big picture is that there's a much bigger player playing out here, and that's just one layer of its consciousness. So in the big picture, the Logos is going to win the day. How much pain we have to go through as we foolishly resist it, well, that's another story. But yeah. So that's the irony. People say we're destroying the earth, you know. Well, you're not really destroying the earth. Well, and we're doing damage to the environment that is really a serious problem, no question, but we're like parasites on the earth. The earth is this massive living being. And, you know, if humanity gets too far out of hand, well, just it's like a dog that shakes its fur, you know. I guess what I'm saying is we have a lot of presumptuousness here that we have much more. We got to get more humble about this. We got to get this in perspective here, you know. So, okay, that's your story. Now, I don't know if you have a sense of what ashram you're in. Most of the people that seem to be attracted to this philosophy come out of this ashram. A lot of them also come out of this ashram. We have occasionally people coming out of this ashram that at least come to these sorts of events. But that doesn't mean that, you know, like for instance, there's a lot of people in the third ray ashram who are out there that would never come to these events. Well, never. I have a couple of my students that are fantastic, brilliant people that are third ray disciples. But you're going to find them in big activities having to do with corporate planning and engaging in big economic affairs that have to do, if they're really advanced disciples, they're really trying to create some sort of economic pattern, product, or something that actually does have an uplifting effect on humanity. And that work is just as sacred as anything you and I could do. So you know, that sometimes people say, well, why are there so many second-rate people in your groups and not all these other groups? It's because second-rate people come together in this way. Third-rate people come together in another way, you see? Yeah. All right. Any other questions you'd like to? Yeah.
Yeah, when you said about Blavatsky's occultism comes before, like in the 21st century,
Must win the day.
must win the day. If occultism means that what that is hidden, that's what it means, isn't it, occultism?
Yeah.
So does it mean that that what is hidden up to now must be revealed?
Mm.
Is that what she means by it?
Okay, that's a really good question. Excellent question. The question is, when I said that Blavatsky said that occultism must win the day by the end of the 21st century, he's right in suggesting that the word occultism has something to do with the hiddenness of things. What does it mean to be an occultist? You know, that word gets a bad rap in society, a really negative rap, and again, it's one of those things where let us define our terms, okay? It's very close to the meaning of esoteric. So we often use the word esoteric as a replacement word for occult, but it is actually occult. Another way of understanding occultist is another term is the practical mystic. That's another word for occultist in a way. But what is it? What do we mean? It means the search for that which is hidden, so it's quite right. And in some contexts that word is actually used and no one bats an eye. I often think about the astronomer who's looking at the sky and the moon happens to go in front of a star, so he can't see the star anymore. That star is said to be occulted, and they use that term. But if you're really using your heart and your mind, and you realize through both of those, there's a passion and a conviction to look deep inside yourself, what are you doing? You're trying to intelligently look for the hidden dimension of your identity and your relationship to the greater life. If a person can truly say that that's how they are and who they are and what they're about, in a way, they're occultists. So I guess what Blavatsky's saying is that humanity, in its collectiveness, must, by the end of the 21st century, understand collectively that the occult way of interfacing with life is the next step it has to take, and that that humanity moves away from a faith-based orientation to the mysteries of life into a more heartfelt, intelligent inner inquiry into the mysteries of life and existence. Doesn't mean that everybody in the world is going to be practicing this sort of thing, but it means that the bias of our collective consciousness should be leaning toward occult ways of looking at things. That's how I would see it. But it's a great question. I've never really thought about it in the way you've asked it. That's great. Yeah.